Rachel Reeves just gave a speech laying the groundwork for her budget that's going to come through in a few short weeks, and we are all very aware already of the dire situation that our country is in, and sadly it is only going to get worse as this next round of tax rise is coming to force. But Reeves' speech essentially stands as one of the most egregious pieces of socialist propaganda that we've seen in recent memory, seeking to rewrite history and put blame for Labour's failing government at our feet instead. And so I personally think it's incredibly important that we make it clear why these problems are actually happening and how this all goes back to the start of the Labour government. And that's why in this video, we're going to literally watch her speech through the entire thing, and I'm going to pause and tell you every single thing that she gets wrong. Now, my background, why should I be talking about this? Well, my full-time job isn't this small politics channel, it's a medium-sized finance channel where I cover financial and macroeconomic based news, and so I do feel I have a good grasp on just basic economics, enough to put everything that the Chancellor says wrong right. So let's get right into it.
Will deliver my second budget as Chancellor of the Exchequer. At that budget, I will make the choices necessary to deliver strong foundations for our economy.
You would think you would lay foundations when you start in government a year ago, but no, obviously the foundations she laid then put us in this poor situation. So she's trying to rewrite this speech as her founding speech and act like this is actually the first opportunity she's had as Chancellor to set the country in the direction that she sees fit. That's not the case. She's been in power for a year now. This is entirely on her.
My budget, led by this government's values of fairness and opportunity, and focused entirely on the priorities of the British people. Protecting our NHS, reducing our national debt, and improving the cost of living.
None of those things will be met whatsoever. We'll go in more detail onto the national debt later and how actually the debt will continue to rise no matter what, because she's only ever talking about the deficit, not the debt, when she sets out concrete principles. And yeah, increasing opportunity, helping growth, helping people grow and get wealthy in this economy, it just isn't happening. Taxation does not cause wealth. It hinders wealth in every single situation.
There is a lot of speculation about the choices that I will make.
Driven by you and your organisation.
These are
leaking to the press.
That will shape the future of our country for years to come. I want people to understand the circumstances we are facing, the principles guiding my choices, and why I believe they will be the right choices for our country. We are a country with considerable economic strengths, an open trading
waning
economy,
every day.
a global hub for cutting-edge industries, from AI to biotech.
Nonsense. AI does not exist as an industry in this country whatsoever. I have two friends who are building AI companies right now. They're sitting at around about £1 million per year in annual recurring revenue. They are the only people I know doing this. Everyone else working in AI, they are in Silicon Valley. They're either in China or the United States. The UK does not have an AI industry. This is a lie.
With world-leading universities and scientific institutions, and a talented and a committed workforce. But years of economic mismanagement has limited our country's potential, with long-term issues continually unchecked and potential unrealised. At the budget last year, I fixed the foundations, dealing with the aftermath of Liz Truss's disaster.
She already said that the foundations need to be laid, but now she's saying that she has already laid the foundations. And again, you're going to hear it here. She goes back to attack Liz Truss, something that happened literally longer duration behind where we are today compared to when she came into power. Liz Truss is old news at this point. The impact she had to the gilt markets, the bond markets, practically negligent when you consider that actually we are far surpassing the interest rates that we're paying on our national debt today under the Labour government than we ever were under Truss.
Disastrous mini-budget and the £22 billion black hole in the public finances left by the previous government.
Which has been turned into a £120 billion black hole.
I put our public finances back on a firm footing, provided an urgent cash injection into our faltering public services, and began rebuilding our economy. But since that budget, the world has thrown even more challenges our way.
Actually, they really haven't. The global economic situation has been really rather steady and stable for the last year, far more so than the 4 years preceding that, where the Tories had to deal with the war in Ukraine, which actually did cause massive supply side shocks to energy prices, and then COVID on top of that. Labour have had a dream of a first year. They haven't had to deal with Brexit, they haven't had to deal with Ukraine, they haven't had to deal with COVID, and yet they've still managed to mess it up entirely.
The continual threat of tariffs has dragged on global confidence.
And the tariffs that we're paying for the US is just 10%. That's just 5% higher than the WTO, World Trade Organization rules that we were seeing before. And even on our key industries where we are exporting a lot of goods to the United States, like the one car company we have that's a success, Range Rover, guess what? We're allowed to export 100,000 of them to the United States a year before we pay any extra additional tariffs. And Range Rover export about 100,000 to the US every year. We just don't make many things here and we don't sell them to the US. And the people who do sell things to the US, like myself, I sell a lot of sponsorship and advertising basically to American companies. Guess what? None of that is tariffed because it's a service, not a good. So Trump's tariffs haven't impacted any part of that economy or the British economy for that note. These tariffs from Trump, they just don't impact the UK much to any degree.
The continual threat of tariffs has dragged on global confidence, deterring business investment and dampening growth.
Inflation hasn't been too slow to come down. It has gone up under your watch. I'm just going to take a second here and find a graph which shows you just how egregious that lie there was. Okay, so on screen now, you can see the UK's inflation rate over the last 12 months. 1.7% last September, just before Reeves put out her first budget, up to 2.3, 2.6, 3, 3.5, now sitting at 3.8%. She more than doubled the inflation rate. That is not inflation taking too long to go down. That is Labour causing inflation to rise through inflationary fiscal policy.
As supply chains continue to be volatile, meaning the costs of everyday essentials remain too high.
Because you made them high.
And the cost of government borrowing has increased around the world.
And it's increased in the UK to a much greater degree because of your incompetence.
The previous government has been particularly exposed to.
That is true. The Tories did mess up as well.
World, we also face pressure to increase our defence spending, and it is right that we do that, protecting ourselves from hostile actors and supporting our allies. And there are other pressures.
Gosh, she really does lack any kind of charismatic bone in her body.
The Secretary of Work and Pensions, and this whole government are committed to reforming our welfare state so that it is not a system that counts the costs of failure, but one that invests in success.
Her media manager needs to tell her that when you're running a press conference talking to a camera, it's okay to look at the camera. It's okay to stare. That's who you're talking to, not the random press officers who are sat in the room around you. Stop looking around like this. Look at the bloody camera. That's who you're talking to.
And protects those
inept in
who
every
need it
way.
most.
Inept in every way.
There is nothing progressive about refusing to reform a system that is leaving 1 in 8 young people out of education or employment. So we have begun the job of creating a system that protects people who cannot work.
Yeah, by increasing taxes on employment. Employers' national insurance has gone up. That's made it more expensive to employ people. You're facing an unemployment crisis at the same time as you are increasing taxes on businesses hiring new people. Do you not understand how inept and just utterly ludicrous that sounds?
And empowers those who can. And there are longer-term challenges too.
I'm going to have to turn this up, speed-wise.
Feeling, shared by millions of people across
insane.
the country, that the economy isn't working as it should. Alongside the budget this month, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the UK's public finance watchdog, will set out the conclusions of their review of the supply side of the UK economy.
And it will say it's awful and worse than expected.
But it is already clear that the productivity performance that we inherited from the last government is weaker than previously thought.
Yes, they're downgrading
productivity. A less
productivity.
productive economy is one that produces less output per hour worked. That has consequences for working people, for their jobs and for their wages. And it has consequences for the public finances too, in lower tax receipts.
That's true.
It's not a question
She's not going to collect as much as she wanted.
Poor productivity means that we're putting in more, but getting out less.
No, it doesn't. It means you're putting out, these are productivity growth forecasts. What the OBR is talking about here, she actually is entirely wrong on that. She has genuinely no understanding of basic economics. Productivity, in terms of what the OBR is talking about and what their report is going to establish, is literally just GDP, gross domestic product. It is the total amount of economic activity within our economy, and it isn't related to how much people are putting in. If everyone tomorrow worked an extra 10 hours a week in the country, actually the country would be higher on these productivity forecasts. That they are not weighted for how many hours people are working or the equipment that we're using or the investment into infrastructure or anything like that. This is purely on a GDP-based basis, what the OBR are talking about here. She is entirely wrong about that. I don't understand how she can stand up on stage, speak to millions of people, and be so innately wrong on such basic, simple issues.
It means too many businesses and workers don't have the tools that they need. Trains that run on time, broadband that's fast and reliable, access to new technologies, or proper training so people have the right skills for the job. For a long time, commentators have talked about Britain's productivity puzzle. But it's not a puzzle. The causes of our economic underperformance
yes,
are well
overtaxation.
understood. The chronic stop-go cycle of public investment has left
nothing
us
to do
roads
with
full of
the
potholes,
taxation
high
driving
energy
us into the ground,
unstable
apparently.
conditions for vital business investment in skills and technology. And long-term failure to invest in our regions has built growth on a narrow base, with some parts of the country forging ahead.
That is true.
while
London
others
is
fall behind.
very successful, very productive. The rest of the country
previous
isn't.
governments have not adequately faced up to
True,
these
again,
challenges.
the Tories were an abject failure.
Political convenience has been prioritised over economic imperative. The decision to pursue a policy of austerity after the financial crisis dealt a hammer blow to our economy, gutting our public services and severing the flows of investment that would have put our country on a path to recovery. The years that followed.
See, the thing about austerity is that it certainly did harm the UK, but it wasn't in action for nearly as long as people think it was. We're talking basically about 2012 through 2017. At the point where austerity was actually dominating public spending, and it was, harming productivity and harming the growth of our economy. From then onwards, once May came into power, in particular, once Boris came in, austerity was gone. It was gone and dusted, and no one spoke about it, and no government was putting it into action. Actually, Rachel Reeves is more likely to be moving in the direction of austerity than Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak ever were. So trying to blame the entire failure of the British economy over the last 20 years, not decade, not just 10 years, 20 years it is now, actually, just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Also, she's supposedly putting forward her antidote to austerity over the last year, and yet the country has been getting worse over the last year. We are poorer on a per capita basis today than we were a year ago when she came into power. So again, it just doesn't stand up to scrutiny, what she's saying.
By instability and indecision, with crucial capital investment continually sacrificed and hard decisions put off again and again. And then a rushed and ill-conceived Brexit that brought further disruption, as businesses trying to trade were faced with extra costs and extra paperwork.
That's the other line of attack. She's attacking Brexit so that she can try and blame everything on Farage. Look out for that.
Fragile. We finished the pandemic with higher death rates and higher debt than our peers.
Yes, the COVID response was disastrous.
It's about being honest with the people about the consequences that those choices have had. It is my job to deal with the world as we find it, not the world that I might wish it to be. Not to commentate or to speculate, but to act. In my May's lecture last year, I set out our plan for solving our productivity problem through a programme of stability, investment and reform.
Stability.
When I became Chancellor,
There is no stability. Inflation is up, interest rates are up, growth is down. That is the definition of instability.
And when I became Chancellor, I began to put that plan into action, stabilising our public finances, making the tax and spending decisions to get debt down and to fund our public services sustainably, changing the fiscal rules to increase public investment by £120 billion over the course of this Parliament, and crowding in private investment too, for road and for rail, for housing and nuclear power, and reforming our economy, ripping up the planning rules so we can build housing.
Again, something that is genuinely, truly needed to fix our economy, but they've been in power for a year And there has been no increase in house building. House building is down over the last year. There has been no increase in planning applications granted, or there's been no reform to the system. They're just spouting out these talking points because this is what a focus group told them is popular. But they refuse to actually make any serious attempt to reform the country, just like the Tories did. When the Tories were in power, it was the exact same story. They would speak out against immigration day after day, week after week, and then just keep increasing immigration and changing visa rules to make it easier for people to come and easier for people to bring their families over. Labour are doing the exact same thing here. They're just talking about these ideas that need fixing, refusing to take any action against it, despite what she says.
Bringing the brightest and the best to our shores with a new visa regime, and signing trade deals with the EU, the US and India to help businesses export around the world.
Yes, India in particular, where Indians are going to be paying less income tax through national insurance, basically exemptions that they will have when they move to the UK for the first 2 years of them being here. An Indian move into the UK will be cheaper to employ than a British person already living in the UK under this Labour government, thanks to their brilliant trade deal. That is borderline treasonous in my opinion. But again, that's going to make the British person, the average British person, poorer, not richer.
We've begun to see the results of those plans in falling interest rates and falling NHS waiting lists, in rising wages and rising investment.
Which we haven't seen.
But I know that real progress takes time. Our growth was the fastest in the G7 in the first half of this year. I don't expect anyone to be satisfied with growth of 1%. I'm not.
Of course, because she's talking about headline growth and ignoring growth on a per person, per capita basis. When you look at growth on a per person basis, again, we are poorer than every other G7 country, and we've been getting poorer at a faster rate than the rest. How is that possible? Because she's importing cheap foreign migrants who come here and they create economic activity, technically, because we are taking out debt, right? Printing more money and then giving that money to these immigrants, and then they spend that money in the economy. That technically increases productivity, that technically increases growth and puts the G7, our GDP growth in headline figures above that of the rest of the G7, except for the United States, by the way. She's outright wrong about that. I don't know why she even said not second best. It's not. The US is ahead of us. But yeah, this is all an illusion of mass immigration being used to disguise these figures. She can never speak about anything on a per person basis, because if she does, it breaks the illusion and exposes to everyone how she's lying and why she's wrong.
The first part of our planning reforms will add an additional £6.8 billion to the size of our economy in the next 5 years.
Do you know how big our economy is? 3 trillion. We are a £3 trillion economy, and she's talking about adding £6 billion. I mean, what is 1% of 3,000? It's literally 30. She's talking about 0.2% growth from her planning reforms over the next 5 years. That is 0.05% growth over the next year compounded onwards. That is a pathetic amount for a chancellor to be standing on stage and speaking and boasting about to millions of people, and it exposes just how pathetic her understanding of economics is. The sad truth is that she knows most people don't know how big our economy is. And they don't know how small £6 billion really is in the grand scheme of things. And so it doesn't jump out at them as, a lie by omission, what she just said, but it well and truly is.
But the next part, our planning bill, must complete its passage through Parliament before it can make a difference. Interest rates, which rose from 0.1% to 5.25% in the last Parliament, have now been cut 5 times. But at 4%, they are still a constraint on business borrowing and a burden on family finances.
But you can't lower interest rates if inflation is too high.
Under the previous government. And the choices I make in this budget this month will be focused on getting inflation
doubled since
falling
you came into power.
and creating the conditions for interest rate cuts to support economic
Do not allow her propaganda to break through to you. I showed you the graph. Inflation has doubled from 1.7% in September 2024 to 3.8% in September 2025. Do not allow her lies and propaganda to deceive you into thinking that things are cheaper than they were before. They are not. Things have abjectly gotten worse over the last year.
And creating the conditions for interest rate cuts to support economic growth and improve the cost of living. I understand the urge for easy answers. But politicians of recent years have become addicted to shelling out for short-term sticking plaster
like your tax raises last year,
making long-term economic plans. They were irresponsible then. And those who continue to push for easy answers are irresponsible now. The UK's national debt now stands at £2.6 trillion, equivalent to 94% of GDP. Before the mini-budget, our borrowing costs were in the middle of the pack compared to other advanced economies. But now, we have the highest borrowing costs of any G7 country.
You notice how she just admitted her mistake there, but somehow didn't take responsibility for it. Before her budget, a year ago, our borrowing costs were at the middle of the pack amongst other G7 countries. That is true. Now they are higher than all the rest. What has changed over the last year? You came into power and you started spending money, acting like it is, that there's no issue with it and that these tax rises are going to pay for everything. They aren't. Listen to this again.
Before the mini-budget, our borrowing costs were in the middle of the pack compared to other advanced economies.
That's brilliant. She said mini-budget. She's still trying to lay the blame on Truss. I'm going to bring up the 10-year or the 30-year gilt yields here, just to show you how much of a lie that is. 1 second. Okay, what you see here is the interest rate on a UK 30-year gilt. That means the government takes out debt now. They say to the people, investors, they say, hey, we're going to give you this coupon for £100 and we're going to pay you whatever this interest rate here says every single year for 30 years. And at the end of the 30 years, you're going to get all your money back as well. This is how much we were paying during COVID, right? 0.8%, very, very low rates. We go back prior to that and you see actually, very, very low in the times of austerity due to essentially near zero interest rates because the economy wasn't moving. This is the last 5 years. This right here is the mini budget. This spike, seeing gilt yields rise from around 2.5% to almost 5% over the course of 1 month when Liz Truss came into power, that was a problem. Undoubtedly, that was a problem. However, we saw it then drop back down as Truss was ousted from power, and then we saw it sit under Rishi Sunak around about here, slowly rising because the state of our economic affairs are getting worse. And when they get worse, investors demand a higher premium for lending money to our government. Then we have the last year here, right? We have the end of 2024, mid-2024, when Truss came into power, around about 4.5%, a very steady but very consistent rise in the cost of government debt over the last year, peaking at 5.5%, far and away higher than any of the trouble we saw under Liz Truss up here. Far worse. Yes, it's fallen down over the last month, but this is a little blip. It will continue to trend upwards. When she tries to blame Liz Truss for higher government cost of debt, she is outright lying to you. 5% right now, an absolute peak for literally 1 minute of 1 hour of 1 day for Liz Truss of around that level, followed by a drop back down. Again, she is outright lying.
But now, we have the highest borrowing costs of any G7 country. Today, 1 in every £10 of taxpayers' money is spent on debt interest.
That is true, and that is ludicrous.
Not paying that debt down, but just paying the interest to our creditors. At the budget last year, I changed the fiscal rules to strike a careful balance, to invest more in capital alongside a credible plan to grow our economy and bring debt down within this Parliament.
Credible.
That was the right decision.
Nothing about it was
to break
critical.
the cycle of low productivity and low growth. But that additional investment can only be delivered because markets know my commitment to the fiscal rules is ironclad. Some people say
Not
that we
really
should
true.
just sidestep those rules, that we can borrow more without consequence by simply reclassifying areas like defence or education. But no accounting trick can change the basic fact that government debt is sold on financial markets.
That is true.
There are limits.
The real issue, and what this graph here shows you, is essentially the higher this line is, the lesser the trust the financial markets have in the Chancellor and the government, right? So when that spike happens with Liz Truss, that's because she announced huge spending stagnation. So she wasn't going to cut spending, but she was going to cut taxes. That meant she was going to have to borrow a lot more money, go into a lot more debt. What this represents is over the last year, investors are getting less and less confident in Rachel Reeves' ability to make the economy grow and to pay off their debt. And that's why they demand a higher premium and they get paid more interest for the money that they are lending the government. That's what it comes down to.
There are limits on the price that banks, hedge funds and pension funds are willing to pay for our debt. And we are competing constantly with other countries also selling debt. The more that we try to sell, the more it will cost us.
That is true.
It is important that everyone.
But she is borrowing more right now than any government in British history ever has. Yes, on inflation-adjusted terms, we spent more during the First World War and the Second World War and took out more debt. Outside of those two literal world wars, a government of the UK, even the outright socialist governments of Harold Wilson, back in the 20th century, have never borrowed as much money as Rachel Reeves is every single month right now.
The public and politicians understand that reality. The less we spend on debt interest, the more we can spend on the priorities of working people. Our NHS, our schools, our national security. The public service is essential to both a decent society and a strong economy. At the budget last year, I provided our public services with a vital cash injection, and I am proud of that choice.
And that's why the cost of our debt went up by so much.
In our NHS, getting waiting
Because
lists
she
down by
borrowed
over
more to do
200,000
that.
since the election. Proud that it is a Labour government that is investing in our children through the rollout of free breakfast clubs and free school meals.
Unnecessary spending that really should just be covered by parents, yet it added to our debt burden and made the financial situation of this country worse. 1 minute ago, literally 1 minute ago, she's telling us about the need for us to be, fiscally sound and sure and to not waste money and to borrow less. And then she starts boasting about these pointless populist policies that she put in place just to try and win votes from parents. Utter nonsense.
And proud that it is a Labour government that is funding our armed forces and remains resolute in our NATO commitments. The alternative is to row back on those investments, to return to the cycle of austerity and decline, which is what got us here in the first place, passing the cost of government failure onto communities and families, stifling our economic growth, and weakening Britain's foundations in an unstable world. I will not repeat those mistakes. But if we want strong public services in the decades to come, then we must recognise that productivity and efficiency are not only a challenge for business, they are a challenge for the public sector too. At the spending review, I announced £14 billion of efficiencies per year to be delivered by 2029. Cutting government spend on consultancies, getting rid of bureaucratic quangos and regulators, and driving efficiency through AI and digital technologies.
£14 billion a year is not even 1% of our economy.
Beyond, I will continue to
it is not enough.
For more productive
it's 0.5%.
and more efficient public services right across government, making savings and rooting out waste wherever I find it. Now, my opponents will tell you that they could do more. Reform, who promise savings.
Here comes
from our
the
public services.
attacks.
And yet, in Kent County Council and councils they run across Britain, apparently they can't find a single penny, and instead going to increase council tax for more than 2 million people.
Yes, because over the last 15 years, what we've essentially seen is Westminster have been mandating and making it a legal requirement for local councils to provide more and more services to the people within that constituency, regardless of whether or not the people want it. So if, for example, a parent of a child has anxiety, it is now a legal requirement in every council in the UK, because of the Tories and Labour over the last 2 decades, that the council have to pay for an individual taxi driver to drive that child to school every single day, costing as much as £2,000 a week for one child. Councils are legally required to cover that cost. They have no choice in the matter. They are not allowed to say no because of these ridiculous rules that have been placed upon them at the expense of British people. She has no interest in fixing these problems. Instead, she just wants to hop on and attack reform to try and protect her failing polling data.
Who promised £47 billion of cuts, when during 14 years in power they oversaw rising welfare costs and a growing civil service.
Absolutely.
What were they doing
the
for 14
Tories
years?
are a party of big
Let us be
government and
clear.
big spending.
There is no way that cuts on that scale, equivalent to cutting our entire armed forces or cutting every single police officer in the country twice over, could be delivered without devastating consequences for our public services.
See, that's really
Austerity,
not true. We
reckless
can
borrowing,
just cut
made-up
benefits
numbers.
those who don't
They are the
work and
problems,
refuse to work.
not the solutions. They are the mistakes of the past which would only take us backwards. I will not repeat them.
Now making
When I was
whole new
appointed
mistakes
Chancellor,
that no one even
people
thought
put
were
their faith in
possible.
me to take
Well
the country
done.
forward. Not to be swayed by political convenience. Not to always do what is popular. But
To never do what
right.
is popular, really,
At the
and
budget,
never
I
do
will
what is
continue
right.
to deliver on the priorities of the British people. Cutting NHS waiting lists, cutting the national debt, and cutting the cost of living. And in the context of the long-term challenges on our productivity and heightened global uncertainty, any chancellor of any party would be standing here today facing the choices that I face.
That is
The
simply not true.
difference is in the priorities and the values that will guide those choices. Mine will be a budget for growth, with fairness at its heart, and a budget that supports businesses to create jobs and to innovate.
It will be a budget of higher taxes. What we really see from this speech is Reeves' attempt to sort of drive up a sense of national pride in British people and to act like we're under attack from a foreign power and that we have to pull it together and we have to unite amongst one another and unite behind this Labour government so that they can fix this problem, trying to, tap into that Blitz-esque wartime spirit. The problem is, every single problem that she's talking about didn't come from some foreign actor. It came from our native political establishment, from the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, actively working against the interests of British people for 3 decades. Really, this whole problem started with the start of the Blair administration in the late 90s. That's what this all comes down to. She's trying to lay the groundwork and say that, yes, she's going to raise taxes, but it's not her fault. It's the fault of Russia invading Ukraine. It's the fault of COVID killing millions around the world. It's the fault of populist ideas coming from reform, even though they're not in power and they've never been in power. I implore you to see through her lies and to understand that every single decision she has to take today, and she is being forced to take decisions on tax rises, they're taken because of her ineptitude, her incompetence, and her failure to understand basic economic theory 1 year ago today. She will be forced to raise taxes today, almost certainly a form of income tax on working people. I think the new definition going around from Labour is that if you earn more than £47,000 a year, you're not a working person, which is utter nonsense, as if being wellly enumerated for your work means that you are no longer working and putting in your labour and your time. Utterly ridiculous. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm going to cut it here. The last few minutes, she doesn't really say anything new. It's just more political attacks and attempts to reframe the narrative. Do watch out for the budget coming in a few weeks' time. It is going to be messy. There are going to be tax rises, and it is going to cost us dearly. So Rachel Reeves has been exposed as breaking local council law after renting out her family home without a license. It's all over the news and it is getting pretty common at the moment to hear about this, as you can see. So in today's video, we're going to run over what exactly happened, why I think she fell foul of these rules, her